Some cases stay with you because they're frightening. Others stay with you because they don't make any sense. This one has done both. For years, I'd heard people mention an abandoned cabin somewhere deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Depending on who you asked, it was either another exaggerated ghost story or a place locals simply refused to talk about. Every town has one of those places. I didn't think much of it. Until someone sent me a cassette tape. No note, no return address, just a small envelope and a map with one sentence written on the back. The doors weren't locked to keep people out. Closed doors invite people. That sentence led me here. The cabin isn't marked on any modern map. Even finding it felt wrong. The road disappeared long before the trees did. After that, it was nothing but an old hiking trail that slowly vanished beneath years of fallen leaves. The higher I climbed, the thicker the fog became. Not the kind that rolls in for an hour and disappears. This fog just stayed. It swallowed the sound. Even the birds had gone quiet. By the time I spotted the cabin through the trees, it almost looked like it had been waiting for someone to find it. Small, weathered, its windows clouded over with age. The front porch sagged under its own weight. If you drove past it, you'd probably think it had been abandoned decades ago. You'd be right, but that's not why people remember it. They remember what happened inside. Back in the early 1980s, 3 different families vanished here. Not over the course of years, not months. The same night. 12 people in total. Parents, children, even the family dog. Gone. The search began, and the police report suggested no signs of violence, no blood, no broken windows, no footprints leading away from the cabin. Nothing. The strangest part? Every door was still locked from the inside. Whoever, or whatever, left this place never opened a single one. I carefully stepped through the front entrance, expecting little more than dust and rotten wood. Instead, it felt as though someone had simply paused life. The dining table was still set. 4 plates, 4 glasses. The food had long since decayed, but the arrangement remained untouched. A chair had been pushed back slightly, as though someone had just stood up. A child's sweater still hung over the backrest. In the kitchen, a kettle sat quietly on the stove. Upstairs, 2 small beds remained perfectly made. One still had a stuffed rabbit resting against the pillow. I don't know why, but that bothered me more than anything else. People abandon houses. They don't abandon ordinary moments. My first question: what were 12 people doing in this small cabin? There weren't enough rooms and beds for everyone. I kept walking through the rooms, taking photographs, trying to ignore the feeling that someone else was moving through the cabin with me. The place wasn't giving me good vibes. Every old building creaks. Wood expands. Floors settle. I know that. Still, there were moments when I'd stop walking and another floorboard would creak somewhere else. Always somewhere I wasn't. I never found an explanation. Maybe there wasn't one. Most people assume the disappearances began here, but I think they began outside. Behind the cabin, half hidden beneath years of moss and damp leaves, is an old clearing surrounded by pine trees. Well, Nothing remarkable at first glance. Until you notice the ground. Someone had removed several wooden floorboards from an older structure that no longer existed. They'd been carefully laid flat in the earth, almost like stepping stones. At first, I thought they were random scraps of timber. Then I brushed away the dirt. Every single board had carvings. Not words, not initials, symbols. Perfectly cut geometric shapes that repeated over and over again. Triangles inside circles. Lines crossing at impossible angles. Patterns that looked less like decoration and more like instructions. I've seen strange markings before. Old mining symbols, surveyor marks, religious carvings. These weren't any of those. There was something deliberate about the spacing, as though each board belonged in one exact position. Move one, and the entire pattern would break. I spent nearly an hour photographing every carving before stepping back. Only then did I notice something I couldn't see while standing among them. Together, the boards formed one enormous symbol, like a blueprint built into the ground. I tried sketching the layout later that evening. At first, it looked meaningless, just intersecting shapes. But the longer I stared at it, the more familiar it became. I'd seen part of it before. Not here, on the cassette. That tape had been sitting in my bag the entire day. I almost didn't play it. Old magnetic tapes don't age well. Most are little more than static. This one wasn't. The first few seconds were exactly what you'd expect. Wind, crackling, some distant movement. Then, voices. Soft, barely audible. Not singing, not speaking. Something in between, almost rhythmic, as though several people were repeating the same phrase over and over and over again. The recording only lasted 37 seconds, but something happened near the end. A sound, so quiet I almost missed it. I increased the volume, listened again, and this time I heard another voice. It wasn't part of the chanting. It wasn't whispering to the microphone. It sounded closer, calmer, like someone standing just behind the person holding the recorder. Don't look when they come. There were 12. Then the tape ended. I've replayed those 5 words more times than I'd like to admit. I still don't know who said them, or who they were. Playing the recording in this place felt strange. It was like I am trying to reopen something that had been closed for decades. But the more I compared the recording to the carvings outside, the more I started believing the tape wasn't documenting a ritual. It was documenting instructions. And if that's true, then the 12 people who disappeared that night may not have been running from something. They may have been following it. Next, I wanted to know who carved those symbols, and why 3 different families, with no connection to each other, all ended up in the same cabin before vanishing without a trace. I left the cabin just before sunset, not because I was scared. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. The truth was, I needed distance. Everything I'd seen inside that place, the untouched dinner table, the carved floorboards, the voice on the tape, it all felt connected somehow. I just couldn't see how. And since I have investigated these types of cases before, I know you shouldn't mess with something you don't know. That's how you keep yourself alive. Back at my desk, I spread out every photograph I'd taken. The cabin, the clearing, the carvings, the sketch I'd made of their layout. For hours, nothing stood out. Then, out of nightwear, I rotated the sketch 90 degrees. The pattern changed. It wasn't random at all. The carvings formed a path. Not a map of the mountain, a map of the cabin. Every triangle matched a room. Every circle lined up with a doorway. The long intersecting lines. They all pointed toward the same place, the front entrance. That's when I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. The doors. Every account I'd read mentioned that investigators found every door locked from the inside. People always focused on the impossible part. How did 12 people disappear? No one ever asked a simpler question. Why were the doors locked in the first place? The next morning, I drove into the nearest town. It only had a few hundred residents, and most of them had lived there their entire lives. When I asked about the cabin, people became careful. Not frightened, just reluctant. Like they were deciding how much they should say. Eventually, one elderly woman pointed me toward a small historical society tucked behind the town library. She said, "If anyone still remembers those mountains, it'll be him." The historian wasn't what I expected. No dramatic warnings, no mysterious riddles. Just an older man surrounded by shelves of weathered journals and hand-drawn maps. His name was George. When I mentioned the cabin, he sighed before saying anything. I was wondering when someone would start asking about it again. He disappeared into a back room and returned carrying a faded notebook. Inside were sketches of symbols that looked disturbingly familiar. Not identical, but close enough that I immediately recognized the style. He told me the markings had appeared across the Appalachian Range for generations. Always near isolated cabins. Always near dense mountain fog. No one knew who carved them. The oldest settlers simply avoided places where they appeared. Not because they believed the carvings were cursed, but because they believed they were warnings. Warnings left by people who'd already seen something in the mountains. Then he said something I haven't stopped thinking about since. There are stories about the fog, he told me. Not ghost stories. Older than that. According to local folklore, the mountains weren't haunted. They were inhabited. Not by monsters hiding in the trees, but by something that only existed when the fog became thick enough to erase the horizon. The old stories called them the Keepers. No one described what they looked like, only what they did. They never forced anyone to follow them. They simply appeared. Some people ignored them, others became curious, and a few walked willingly into the fog, never to return. I asked him why the number 12 kept appearing in different stories. He looked down at the notebook for a long moment before answering. The Keepers don't take people one at a time. It takes complete circles, families, groups, communities. Never an individual, he said. I'd heard enough urban legends to know better than to accept every old story as fact. But one detail caught my attention. Every disappearance he'd documented happened during the same week of the year, late October, when the fog settled lowest across the ridges. Coincidence? Maybe. But it was one coincidence too many. Before leaving, I showed him the cassette. Not the recorder itself, just a photograph. The moment he saw it, his expression changed. Quietly, he asked, "Did you play it?" I nodded. He didn't speak for several seconds. Then he said, "Whatever's on that recording, don't play it up there." Of course, that's exactly what I ended up doing. I returned to the cabin after nightfall. The forest felt different in the dark. "The keepers don't take people one at a time," he said, so I took the risk. Every tree looked closer. The fog was thicker than before, drifting silently between the trunks like slow-moving water. The clearing was almost impossible to see until I was standing inside it. I placed the cassette recorder on one of the carved boards. For a long time, nothing happened. I almost laughed at myself. Maybe I'd let the stories get into my head. Maybe this entire case had a perfectly ordinary explanation that I'd missed. Then, the recorder clicked, on its own. The tape began playing. Static, wind, the familiar voices, soft, rhythmic, repeating the same phrase again and again. The sound echoed strangely through the trees, farther away than it should have. As though the voices weren't coming from the recorder anymore. They were moving through the forest, around me. That's when I noticed the fog. It wasn't drifting anymore. It had stopped, perfectly still, as if the entire forest had forgotten how to breathe. I reached for the recorder and froze. Fresh footprints had appeared in the damp earth around the clearing. A dozen of them. Bare feet, different sizes, adults, children. They formed a perfect circle around the carvings. None of the prints led into the clearing. Every instinct told me to leave. Instead, I looked toward the cabin. The front door was open. I know it has been closed. I checked it before walking outside. Yet now it stood wide open, swaying gently. The light from my flashlight reached only a few feet inside before disappearing into darkness. For a second, I thought I saw movement. Not someone walking, more like someone stepping back, waiting, watching. I never went inside. Some mysteries don't become clearer the closer you get. Sometimes, they're waiting for you to take one more step. I stayed still. I was terrified. I couldn't move. I took out the moonstone given to me by a shaman when I was investigating a case in West Virginia. The earth was slightly vibrating, like more people were walking beside me, but I only saw footsteps. No noise. I felt heavy in the head, and then everything went dark. I woke up before sunrise. The footprints were gone by morning. So was the fog. The recorder was still sitting exactly where I'd placed it. I took the belongings and ran. I didn't even check the cabin. I was so scared and thankful at the same time. At my desk, I thanked God. When I played the tape back one final time, expecting to hear the same 37 seconds, there was something new, right at the end. After the voice that says, "Don't look when they come," another voice answered, quiet, almost impossible to hear. It said, there were 13. I've counted the names from that cabin more times than I can remember. Every newspaper clipping, every handwritten list, every forgotten record. They all agree. 12 people disappeared. So who was the 13th? After a few days, I received a parcel. The parcel had no name and the same packaging as the cassette. There was a photograph of 12 people. It looked like it was taken before they went into the mountains. Behind it, there was a message. You shouldn't have played that cassette that night. You have been marked. Never visit that cabin again. Why would George send me the cassette and this photo in the first place? Who took this photo? What did he achieve by doing this? Was George involved in this? Was he the one who led these people in the mountains? And was I the 13th one? I drove to the town, but he was gone. Some said he goes on adventures. He never stays here long. I was lucky that day I met him. I thought this case was over. At least I knew what took those people. But still, there were so many questions still unanswered. This incident and case genuinely terrified me. Then, while filing these photographs away, I noticed the exact same geometric carving etched into the underside of a bridge nearly 400 miles from the Appalachian Mountains. Different places, different decade, same symbol. That's where the next case begins.